You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Successful Screenwriter Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything screenwriting. Here we interview successful screenwriters and filmmakers to find out just what it takes to make it in the industry. Just a heads up, this episode is brought to you by my book, The Guide for Every Screenwriter, which has been listed as one of the best screenwriting books of all time by the Book Authority. If you're looking for something that reveals the secrets of screenwriting in an easy to understand and engaging way, then this is the book for you. You can find The Guide for Every Screenwriter at thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com/books. Now, on to the show. All right, welcome to the podcast. We have an awesome guest today. Stephen D. Katz is a director, and he actually wrote the book Film Directing Shot by Shot. I actually got to read it myself. It's a very good book. Stephen, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. Great to be here.
You know what's awesome is I've had directors on the show before, but what I really love about what you're doing is that you're a director and you're a screenwriter, so we can talk a little bit of the same language here.
Sure, absolutely. And you know, I tried to, when I wrote Shot by Shot, I was informed by both my visual background and the writing background, but probably more from the writing background because that's the core. You don't have anything to shoot unless you have a script.
Right, exactly. So I like to start out these shows by getting a little bit about your origin story. So if you can kind of bring me about how you got into the industry and how that led you to the book, you know, you can cut it down a little bit. It's okay.
Yeah, because I'm not 21. It's a long period. So, well, okay. Yeah, look, I grew up in the 60s and I was a kid filmmaker. I got a hold of my dad's movie camera. And I grew up near New York City in a town where there were a lot of artists. So there was, you know, certainly was supported in the schools and that. And both my parents had some interest in the arts, my mom in music, and she was a terrific illustrator, chose a different path. My dad, when he was winning the Second World War, and when he got out, he did photography for a while. So I had that stuff. Anyway, so then I happened to have a second cousin, Milton Olson, who I love dearly, and he was a visual effects special effects person in projectionist in New York City. And he controlled all the background projectors in the days, you know, your audience probably doesn't remember too much if you look at old films. But we used to put the screen up behind the car and no one was fooled. It looked ridiculous, but that's all there was. He did that. So I was on set when I was 10 and 11 during the summers, and I'd go visit him. But anyway, so then I got my first piece. I did light shows for a while for the Grateful Dead and others in the late 60s. I worked at the Fillmore East, kind of really training with Joshua White of the Joshua Light Show. And he ultimately became a director on, among other things, Seinfeld. But anyway, at the time we were all doing light shows. And I kind of went down that direction because it was very visual. It was very cinematic, but there were no unions. There was no difficulty. It was just for, you know, young people were the only ones doing it. Anyway, so then I did, you know, when I was making films, and I'll just jump real quickly now. So in the late 1970s, going into the 80s, I made a short subject which got on Saturday Night Live. It was a parody of Brian De Palma. And in its day, it was actually, if they played it, it was a hit, you know. So that got me a little traction. And then I wrote a screenplay for Sean Cunningham, who did, at the time he had not done Friday the 13th. So when I did a thing, he told me I was to be a thriller for Jane Fonda and Christy McNichols, and I believed him. So I wrote that. And then I wrote a script in my late 20s, early 30s for somewhere around there for John McTiernan, who did Die Hard and others. And because John's wife went to high school with me and I got to know him, Candy Land, she was part of the Polaroid Land family, and very smart gal, Smith gal. And then throughout the 80s, I started a commercial production company in New York City and in Connecticut, actually, but we did only work in New York for the most part. And then, I was working in all different ways. I worked in theater for a while because I was frustrated that I couldn't get my screenplays funded. Sure. And so, you know, I wrote a lot of monologues and they got performed almost immediately, which was fantastic. So I did that, and late 90s, late 80s, I should say, into going into the 90s, I got sort of radicalized at the computer. I realized very early on what digital production was going to mean, and this is before Avid was out or anything, and I got there right at the right time, and that's when I wrote Shot by Shot, which had a little bit of, it paid a little bit of attention to what was happening in the computer. That's cool. And then from there, Michael Jackson got in touch with me, and I went out and lived at the ranch, and was his film teacher for about 4 months. Then I did all the previs, although no one called it that at the time, for Clear and Present Danger.
Oh,
the
cool.
producer was a friend of mine. I was out teaching at the American Film Institute doing a workshop, and I went over to visit Ralph Singleton in Paramount, and he said to me, "Oh, we got a big problem. We lost our location. Can you help us with some storyboards or something?" So I said, "Gee, we could do it electronically." So I did that, and that became famous in its day. It was the first really big previs. And then I started Curious Pictures Digital in New York City for the largest animation company there. I opened their digital department. They were famous for doing Pee-wee's Playhouse and other things. And then I opened my own studio in the late 90s. In the 2000s, I ended up going to China for Darren Aronofsky's company. They had an animated film they wanted to do. That ultimately didn't happen. They wanted me to produce it. And but the Chinese discovered me while I was over there looking for a studio for cheap to do this film. And that was 2003 or 4. And then I ended up in China for most of the 2000s.
Wow.
So I came back in 2014 to do a film for my own script. We spent a few $1 million, and the Chinese pulled out. And then so now I have a new feature lined up and other things along that line. So that's kind of the rapid version. And in between, I wrote for Millimeter Magazine. I was on the masthead for a long time, and I did a bunch of other things.
Yeah, man, you have been through it. That's an amazing journey. And the fact that you spent most of the 2000s in China is amazing. So yeah, I mean, you have that experience and that eye on creating, directing for the screen. One of the things that you're talking about with previs, and what I found really fascinating in Shot by Shot, is how you talk about the fact that storyboards have changed over the years. I mean, that's not even something I've considered.
Absolutely, Geoffrey. Well, yeah. Excuse me. Well, yeah. So storyboards have been around for a very long time. Probably, certainly in the silent era. I won't get into a whole history of that, although it's fascinating in its own way. But basically, the word storyboard was coined by an artist over at Disney Studios, and Disney absolutely formalized it as a process.
Okay.
And they were pretty much the same for 3 or 4 decades, and then digital production came along, and I was if I hadn't done it, someone else would have done it, but I was the guy that did. I wrote a book, I did Clear and Present Danger, and Clear and Present Danger got a lot of publicity. They ran on Entertainment Tonight. At the top of the screen was the actual movie. They split the screen. On the bottom was my previs to show how close they were for one of the big action scenes.
So cool, dude.
So today for people, I say if you're going to do storyboards, and now this is directly to directors or even writer directors or writers, you got an iPhone, and it's a studio in your hand, and a lot of people don't draw. Drawing is a challenging thing for storyboard. It's a lot of time. But you can shoot photo boards. They're just as good. And you just have to get a few people. If you want to imagine, I think we spoke about it. We chatted a bit the other day. And so I said, if you're doing Pulp Fiction, and there's the scene, the robbery at the diner, and so the couple does their whole very interesting. Of course, it's great dialogue, but it's all done in a booth.
Yeah,
you could shoot that, you could do it for nothing anytime. You can do that in cars and front doors. Yep. Most things can be shot. And when I was doing commercials in the 80s, I shot most of my stuff in video, with the VHS, what was available at the time, and roughed them out. And I really didn't care about the decor or the set. I only cared where the actor was, and we would borrow favor. Anyway, so that process was useful. And so it has changed. You can edit your photo boards, but they don't even have to be photo boards. They can be video boards. You can go out and shoot your scene before you shoot your scene.
Yeah. Yeah, using your iPhone is a brilliant idea. I mean, I have no artistic ability whatsoever. I've tried a little bit, but at one point I thought about, like, trying to get a digital version of a mannequin that I could kind of set up. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, get some friends together,
Yeah.
free pizza and cookies usually brings people together, and then you can
Yes,
you can stage scenes. I think it's a brilliant idea. I mean, it's like the filmmaking version of a table read.
it
Shooting,
absolutely is. And
yeah, I think that's
that's an
awesome.
yeah, Geoffrey, that's a very good comment. And I think that's exactly right. And, don't be timid about it. No one ever gets to see how bad it was. Or the lighting was bad. You don't care. You do
No.
not care. You will only want to hear how your dialogue plays and how, the general shape of the scene.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. I mean, you talk
Yep.
about staging dialogue, and and this is something I've never paid attention to. You talk about the A pattern and the L pattern
Yeah. And
when
the
it
eye
comes
pattern.
and then about how it's different and changes with how many different characters on the scene. And I had never looked at that before, but now as I'm watching films and I've read your book, I go, oh yeah, that's an L pattern, and
Yeah.
and so, like, just give me a little bit more about that specific mechanic when it comes to setting up a scene.
Yeah. Well, the AINL, the idea of it was this. You shoot two actors. Okay, you can deal with that. Most people can figure out how to do a two shot and over the shoulders. But then as you add more people, as you might have in any number of scenes, turn on TV when we anytime, and you'll see shows in which there's 3, 4, 5 characters in a
Right.
room.
Yeah.
Major crimes. I was watching with my mom the other night, just to keep her company, and so they had a lot of scenes in the main room, and there's 6 or 7 people. Well,
Yeah.
and so immediately directors who are relatively new go, "Oh my God." But then I realized, and I'd known for some time, that most of the arrangement of actors, key actors, breaks down into these shapes. I mean, it's hard to look, we don't have diagrams here, but
Right.
get the look. But AI and L is kind of how it lines up. There's a triangle, or there's 2 people facing each other, that's an I, or there's 3 people in an L shape.
Right.
And what was important about it is that even as you add people, and
Yeah.
more people, you realize you can always extract the A, I, and L. So they
Wow.
were really designed less as a schema, so you could figure it out on set, as it was beforehand, to kind of get used to what you should be looking for these
Right.
patterns.
I think it's interesting because those different patterns elicit a specific response
Oh yeah,
from the audience. When you talk about the L pattern, where you have 2 people lined up and then a person off to the side, what you see at like dinner table scenes,
yeah,
um, is a pattern of opposition that you're talking about. Like,
that's
there's
right.
conflict here. And I was like, I had never realized that.
Well, yes, and I'll give you a little. This isn't quite on target, but it's close enough. I remember when I was at the American New Theater for a while, and there was a reading,
Yeah.
and the head of the unit, Eric, was out of the actor's studio. He was the artistic director, and so he picked 2 people who really didn't like each other in his rep company, and he put them in the scene back to back. Now I was new there, and I didn't know this, but it was electric. It
Oh,
was
really?
absolutely electric, and everybody in the room knew these guys hated each other. And it was like, and so he had them seated, and they had naturally turned from each other on a bench. They couldn't even face each other and talk. One was this way, the other guy was this way, and it was, you could cut the emotion in the room with a
Wow.
knife. So that's, yes, where you turn, your body language is all those things are controllable when you stage. A lot of people are nervous
Yeah.
about not having your actors, framed exactly the way, close up all the time so you can see their face. But
Hmm.
an actor who turns from you and delivers dialogue is also very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these things are so I tried to point to those kind of things that are easy to understand, so when you get on set, you've already had a chance to understand them a little
Yeah.
bit from a book.
No, I think it's good. I mean, as a screenwriter, it's really important to understand different facets of the industry and profession. I mean, just writing as a screenwriter and not really realizing what the director, producer, or editor is doing, I
Right.
think you're limiting your own knowledge base and you're pigeonholing yourself on what you can really bring to your script. And one of those things, I think, which you talk about as foreground and background. I mean, that's something that we do. Like when we're writing a script, we'll put in something that's in the foreground or something in the background. Usually it's some kind of a visual subtext that we're including in it. And you discuss that as well.
Yes, I do. And let me, to sort of address that point, I'm going to do it a little bit differently and say that there are things in the book that really come from writing. And we also, the other day, we just chatted briefly, and I mentioned this notion of withholding. And so background, foreground also discusses what things are important, what things are not important.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can reverse them and they're ironic. So in other words, people, so for an old cliche is that, you know, if you want to make one of the characters seem really strong and domineering, you shoot them from a very low angle.
Right.
But you take something like the scene, really one of the end scenes in Citizen Kane, where Orson Welles is, you know, he's defeated. He's old, he's left, he's alone in his enormous home, San Simeon, basically, or Xanadu. And so he's stumbling around. The whole thing was shot super low angle. So he's dominating, but actually, because he's so weak at the same time, and you know he's failed, it's like ironic. It's almost like he's grandiose. So
right.
Something that's a cliche. Well, look up at the character and they'll be very strong. And actually, this did the opposite.
Yeah.
So that's one thing about film that's always fascinating is while it is basically true, if you shoot someone from a low angle, they're going to be seen more dominating, but you can subvert that through writing.
I think that's fascinating.
So one of the things I think that that is interesting, well, really the overarching drive in my approach to art, and also in shot by shot, although I'm really emphasizing it much more in my workshops in the last few years, is that basically everything in film is you direct by indirection. Think about it. The most direct medium in the world. You open a book and you talk about a sunset. Someone's writing about a sunset. Well, you don't see a sunset.
Right.
You talk about the waves crashing on the thing. Well, he says that there may be a metaphor, a literary metaphor he's using. Well, but in film, we get all the exact same thing. We get the thing itself.
Yeah.
And therefore, as an artist, since it's such a direct, literal medium, we try and find ways to make it less literal. But part of that is also that storytelling is about not giving everybody everything they need right up front. It's a kind of like a pleasurable frustration or foreplay. So when I use Gone with the Wind, which I think is 700 pages, you know, we start on page 1, go all the way to page 7. It takes us the first 4 weeks of July and our time off or whatever. But actually, why wouldn't you just go to the last page and hear Rhett Butler say to Scarlett, "And frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Well, you don't, because you want all those things that are being withheld. And so if you start looking at books and films and see there's like mini cliffhangers everywhere.
Yeah.
There's answered questions. And so the art of film and the art of writing is how you dole these things out.
No, I agree.
And oftentimes there's multiple things going on at once. You're having multiple overlapping ideas which don't complete in the scene. They're going to be certainly, and the most obvious example of that would be detective fiction, where you're getting the clues with, you know, Jake Gittes in Chinatown.
Yeah.
And that was truly a magnificent screenplay, and that you kind of it cheated far less than most detective movies. You know, most detective movies, they, you know, by the time you get in, when they finally explain what actually happened, oh yeah, well, okay, it was.
Yeah, there's some holes in it. Well, I think you're right. You parse out the information, you create that intrigue, you hook the audience and bring them through that emotional journey, and that is the job. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. And what I find really interesting about working with the visual subtext that you're doing in the subtext that I'm writing is seeing the translation there. Like, okay, I want this to be this certain type of visual, and then the director gets it and he makes it his own, or she makes it his own, and it could be even different from what you expected, but in the end it'll still work.
Well, you know, look, put your ego at the leave your ego at the film. You know, I've had those projects I paid for myself with my own studio money, and those are few and far between. You know, they weren't intended to make money, and I had total control. And one thing you do find is you can do a lot with very little if you don't have layers of bureaucracy having to look at everything and slow it down.
That makes sense.
That's well, I know I won't mention his name, but there's a very successful screenwriter out there and he said to me, I don't charge, the screenplay is free. I charge for the notes.
That's hilarious.
He wasn't kidding. He writes the script, and then they have to, every time someone wants to make a change they have to pay for it.
Right.
And
they pay for a new draft.
Same amount of money, but it focuses the energy. It kind of points the finger all the time at the person wanting to make the change because I got to write a check now.
Yeah. No, that's an awesome perspective. One thing you talk about, which when I'm writing, I'm thinking about this, I'm seeing it, but you talk about action versus reaction shots in conversation and how those can really play into like tension and conflict.
Sure. Well, I would say that, well, they say about acting, all acting is reacting.
Right.
And in terms of, the way it works out when you're as a director, we're now getting into an area which is really more about the actor. And it's good that you chose to talk about this following the notion of how much control you have, because the other place you give up enormous amounts of control is the actor.
Right.
So, you may not know this, but when you direct actors, it's you just don't tell them, well, say it like this is like the worst thing you can do. Okay. And normally you give an action. Judith Wesson, I think, writes the best books on this subject. She's a acting teacher, and so you give your actor the intention, and you say, okay, well, you do get this thing from him, and you don't say get angry when he doesn't give it to you, and then do this. And they may let them figure it out.
Okay.
And so in terms of action reaction, if you let the actor do that, you will end up kind of rewriting yourself. In some instances, you'll look at something. If you have rehearsal time, this happens a lot, and it takes a particular kind of internal fortitude to accept the fact that your own dialogue could get changed, or say, no, it's got to be like that, and here's why. And then, because actors will turn to you and say, I wouldn't say it like that.
Right.
And and the usual answer, which is a little bit flippant, is, well, yeah, but it's not about you. It's about this character, Jake Gittes, or whoever it happens to be.
Right.
And they would say it that guy. But the business of how you frame your actors, and so let's say in a typical dialogue shot, action reaction. Well, I could either have the camera on you now as you speak,
right?
Or which is more important? You're telling me that I have cancer. You get on my doctor, and you tell me, or my wife has cancer, and so at some point, as you say that, now imagine we got the whole take of you.
Yeah.
So which do you think would be stronger? You're saying it or me hearing it?
Right.
Close up of me. I've no lines. Why is the camera on me? Because you want to see what happens. Yeah. So much of what happens in a movie is exactly that thing.
Yeah, that is one thing I've noticed lately in films is the reaction shot is getting a lot more prevalence. Instead of showing the thing that happens, we're seeing the reaction as the thing happens. And I actually think that it's actually pretty beautiful because it is emotionally even more powerful.
And I would say, to add to that is one, you said you're seeing more of it. Well, actually, I think the quality of TV work has improved so much in the last 15 or 20 years because of Sopranos, and even crazily Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which had even as silly as everybody thinks it might have been, it was really sophisticated storytelling.
Yeah.
They would plan stuff in season 2 and pay it off in season 4. And they didn't care if they wouldn't go out of their way to contextualize it. You would just pick it up because it was like a real thing.
That's awesome.
And I so admire Josh Whedon, who's fallen on hard times, but so the quality of television is so good right now. You're seeing much more sophisticated use of film language than we saw for years on regular TV.
No, I agree. I agree. It is a golden
It's
age right
exciting.
now. Yeah. Before I let you go, I want to talk about something that, I mean, I'm seeing more and more often as well, is the tracking shot. And seeing that, I mean, you're seeing like 3, 4, 5 minute shots of one take, and I know sometimes they cheat a little bit with that. When I'm writing a script, I'm never thinking about that. It's never occurring to me. And I don't necessarily think that ever really falls on a writer who's not a writer director. And I just want to get your take on that real quick.
Well, okay. So, first of all, many of those shots. Well, now it's become sort of a point of,
Like a rite of passage.
director that he did the world's longest, single take. And that started with Hitchcock with Rope, although he cheated all over. He had invisible cuts.
Mm-hmm.
But, A Children of Men has a very long, long one. So does, anyway, there's many of them. The most famous one, which I think is a great example of what they should look like, was A Touch of Evil by Weld, because it has all these story points. It has close-ups and medium shots. I mean, and it goes from one step to another. Having well, remember The Player, they sort of did a parody. They're talking about tracking shots.
Yeah.
While we're outside, there's a tracking shot. Well, guess what? That, that shot went on forever, but it was nothing. It was no better than a medium shot, because it was just, it's no big deal to get a steady cam and follow somebody around. That doesn't make it a great shot. What
Right.
made Evil great was that it was incredibly choreographed.
Yeah.
You go to one part of the story, you return, and it's all in one take, and it's all choreographed with things moving and changing and evolving. And so I think that's fun. And I think that's, you do, however, have directors like Spielberg, who's the master of a single master shot choreography. And go look at Poltergeist, even though he didn't actually technically direct it. It was Tobe Hooper, but actually everybody knows Spielberg was on set and did that. So anyway, if you go look at that, it's an amazing scene when they're about to, when the ghost hunter comes to the house and goes in the room. It's got to be like 7 minutes long.
Wow.
It has all this choreography. So anyway, so the tracking shots are interesting in terms of whether, if a writer has a good visual idea, they should put it down, as long as it doesn't take up a lot of space. Nowadays, screenplays are pretty much dialogue.
Yeah.
The day writing all that other stuff in. But if you've got a good idea, I mean, look, I wrote a script once about, it was called Border Town. Takes place in a border town near Mexico, and there's a shot of the desert, and the opening shot is what's actually happening. The guy is dumping his aquarium out, and a fish lands on the desert, all by it. So you can't see anything around. It's just like this really mysterious. What's a desert doing in the middle? And you can see miles out to the Sierra Madres of flat sand. So that was an idea I had, and it was all about water and about anyway, it was that's, if I got that from a screenwriter, I might use it. I might think, it was well thought through.
Okay. That's what I was wondering, is when a director comes into a script, are they looking for that long take shot that they can do, or are they coming together and they go, oh, I can probably make this cool? My only issue is when I see a long take like that, it takes me out of the script. It takes me out of the film, because I know the mechanics that's going into it.
Right. Well, and that's true. I mean, if you look at the great camera choreographers, Bertolucci, Spielberg, Ruben Mamoulian to some extent, Orson Welles, there are a handful of those guys that are the athletes, and Hitchcock, of course. And Hitchcock, and when Orson Welles did Citizen Kane, what everybody said was, wow, he put, technique was part of the picture. He did so many things, and it was just fun. It was like, exhilarating. But we now have a generation of directors since the UCLA Mafia, which was Spielberg and I'm not sure they all went there, but anyways, Lucas, Spielberg, that generation of the new guys, all who went to film school. And, they were the first trained generation, and technique was everything, and it hasn't changed. There's a huge, and now it's so common. There's so much of it that it's lost its oomph. And today, the exotic stuff is telling the truth. The truth is the thing you get the least. And so going back to the fundamentals of writing is never more important than it is today. because technique is, who cares? I mean, the first, a Marvel film that had phenomenal visual effects were, wow, that's incredible, and now it's ho hum.
Now it's expected. Yeah, I think it's a good point that I love how you said that, is that what's important is the truth. So is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you before I let you go?
No, I would just say, if you got right, look, I didn't go to film school. I was a lit major. And so I read and continue. I try and read a lot still, but I can turn around here and show you my unblurred room and see all the books on the floor that I buy. And I promise myself I'll get through. But I read a tremendous amount, and that was the most important thing to me when I was getting started. Was it was all about the story, and I love the short story form more than anything else, and it's the closest to a screenplay. So go out every year and get the best stories of 2021, 2020. Read, it's great to read screenplays. Start reading short stories and other things. So that's probably the key thing for anybody getting into this business, because I run big studios, animation and such, and I've been always astonished at these young guys young guys and girls who come work for me. I love them. They're hugely passionate, but they kind of don't read. They're not really, the arts is movies.
Yeah.
Games to them. And I say, well, that's okay, guys. That's good. That's pop fiction and stuff. But here's all this other stuff.
Right.
And
get your foundation.
Yeah. And in directing, I used to also bring in my favorite first paragraphs from short stories, because it's an incredible example and humbling introduction to having things that are really concise. And you read that first paragraph and it's just like magic. Yeah. And you're opening, and you could say, so gee, as a filmmaker, I want to achieve that in a scene. So I guess my last note is that even if you're a visual stylist, it all starts with the written word, and you only get better at that. Your output is only as good as your input.
Your output is only as good as your input. I love that. Hey, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter by using my handle @ScreenwriterPod. And if you liked the show, please support it by subscribing and sharing the episode on your social media.